I'm the chairman of the I'm the chairman of the Gene Winter Northeast chapter of the Mass Archaeological Society, as well as the president of the society. So I'll do my plugs first. For those of you who haven't paid your chapter dues, please send your $6 check to Dave McKenna. I believe we have resent them out a few times, but if you don't have it, email me. Also, if you're not a member of the Mass Archaeological Society, please consider joining. It's not that expensive, $20 a year for a senior, $30 for an individual, and a family is $35, and then there's higher categories for you who want to feel more generous. We're trying to basically change the museum around down there, so hopefully if you haven't been there in a while, you'll start to see a little bit of changes there. We have speakers lined up for the spring. Lindsay will tell you about the March speaker in a moment, but we have Craig Brown, who's at the University of Edinburgh in April, and I'm not sure which battle he's going to talk about. And then we have Dr. Claudia Chang from Sweetbriar College. So she's retired now. She's going to talk about her work in Uzbekistan, and that area. She hasn't narrowed it down. And if we meet in person, she's willing to come down here and do it. So I'm going to check with Ryan that maybe the Academy will allow that at the end of the year. Also, we'll have people should start thinking about elections, because all the board would love to be replaced, because we've all been doing it for about a decade. So we're hoping that maybe other people will step up and do it. We'd still help out with getting programming and that, but if anyone's interested, we'll be making an announcement again in March about that, because that's when we start to think about it with elections in April or May. Oh, I'm trying to think if anything else exciting has been going on, but I really can't at the moment. I'll let you know that our speaker tonight, well, actually, Lindsay, why don't you talk about who's going to be March, and then I'll talk about Calvin.
Yeah, so next month we are going to have Dr. William Farley, who teaches down at Southern Connecticut State University. And he is actually going to be talking about digital archaeology and archaeogaming. So, when we think about material culture of the past, he's taking a look about what our sort of digital, artifacts are going to be like, and how we need to think about that. So it's actually really kind of interesting. He has a whole YouTube series about some of the stuff that I've been enjoying. He even did a deep dive into the one of the episodes for the Book of Boba Fett. So, if you want to learn how to any of that stuff, definitely join us next month. So.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. Don't be. You
don't need to know anything about, any of the online stuff to enjoy his talk. So.
And tonight's speaker is Dr. Calvin Mires. Calvin and I collaborate quite a bit. We've taught field school together for the past few summers, though COVID has sort of tempered that. Hopefully we'll be able to get back online to teach maritime archaeology again. Calvin's been a speaker for our chapter before, but he had a very exciting project this summer. He was able to escape New England. I was very jealous, and go to the South Pacific, which even made me more jealous. Sure, it made Mrs. Mires very jealous as well. But Calvin's been working on one of the MIA projects, and while he'll tell you the limitations he has on what he can talk about, it was kind of exciting for me, because I feel that we don't really hear a lot about the aircraft side of archaeology, land or underwater, very often. And it really has a lot of local events. I mean, people forget that New England was one of the biggest training areas for the Army, Air Force, and the Navy during World War II. And in fact, on Martha's Vineyard, there are several crash sites underwater that had human remains in them. And that was interesting to me about those, that war casualties are treated differently than training casualties, and yet they were both out there for the same purposes. So when Calvin told me he's working on Project Recovery, it just got me thinking, this is great, and let's see if we can get him to talk about that. I should let you know, Calvin is a man of many talents. We're currently collaborating on a Veterans Heritage Project based out of Waquoit Bay in Falmouth. We're talking to the veterans that actually trained there during World War II. It's called the Cradle of the Invasion. It's where the U.S. developed its amphibious operations at the beginning of the war, before they moved to Florida and California. So D-Day really is a result of training that started here 2 years earlier. Calvin is currently teaching at, let's see, Stonehill, Bridgewater, and I had my list here, but I
just teaching at those two, but research associate down at who?
At Woods Hole.
Yep.
With that, I'll turn it over to Calvin.
Well, thanks, Vic, and thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm a habitual presenter for MAS. It's a good way to get my act together and get things together, and enjoy sharing. And so I'm going to do the song and dance of getting my screen shared, and hopefully it goes smoothly, and start the presentation. So switch. All right, Lindsay, tell me that does it look like we saw before?
Looks good.
All right, I want to give a shout out to this great poster. In fact, I just used it as my cover slide because I really liked it. Tonight, I'm guess Vic did a really good job kind of introducing, and I'd like just to start with seeing if I can get a video to come up. It's a 2-minute trailer for a nonprofit group that I worked with this summer that Vic mentioned, called Project Recover. And they have a new documentary coming out. It can be streamed. Or hoping to get actually some showings in Massachusetts. I've been talking to the people at Project Recover to bring it out here. And I think it does a really good job about what they do. And I'll explain also some of the limitations I had in putting together the slide after it. So I thought this was a good way kind of start off with introducing where I'm going to end up at the end of the talk. So we will remember America's Promise and maritime archaeology is the talk for today. Hopefully technology doesn't fail me. And you can hear it. Lindsay, let me know if the sound doesn't come through. And we're just hoping the bandwidth works. All right, buffering. There we go.
It's still just sort of, oh.
Strange feeling.
It always starts
These
30
are not
seconds.
sterile.
Just bear with me.
Pieces of steel or aluminum. They're what's left of people who were fighting for their lives.
All right. Well, if it doesn't start here in a second, we'll give it a try at the end, or I will recommend. You can see it's the official trailer to What Remains.
Someone in your house is on Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Somebody hop back on, ask him to stay off. So anyway, well, the best laid plans, but it's called To What Remains, and you can find it on YouTube. You can Google it. It is a great introduction to this group, Project Recover. And when Vic asked me to do this, really excited and put together really what I enjoyed going through the pictures, and I had a couple videos which maybe they wouldn't play now, and I had a nice slide deck of around 40 to 50 slides coming together, and decided, because this was sensitive material, I'd reach out to our contacts through Project Recover. Is a nonprofit that works with the Defense POW/MIA Accounting Agency, which is a branch of the Department of Defense, and knowing the U.S. government has certain control over the intellectual property, I reached out to my contact, and she said, "Oh, that's great. everything looks good. Make sure you get Project Recover to approve it. This was last Tuesday. And I said, okay, so I emailed Project Recover. They said, looks good, change a couple slides here and there. I got back to her, they're great. And she says, great, now we'll run it up to the OC and get the department's approval. And I said, oh, and I said, how long do you think that'll take? Because it's the talk's next week. And she said, you may want to start rethinking your talk. So I called up Vic and I said, Vic, here's the situation. I can't use any of my slides because it's probably not going to be approved in a week. And that's why there's a little delay in getting the announcement. Did a workaround, and when we get there, I will show everybody. There's some approved pictures, but in doing this, what I kind of decided to do was, well, let's take a little journey on how I ended up in Palau and some current work here in Massachusetts with veterans group. So in 2017, a maritime archaeologist walks into a dive conference at Boston Sea Rover. Any of you familiar with that? And was walking around, watching the presentations, and then went down to the, the kiosks, and I saw a booth that was working with veterans, and I tapped this gentleman on the shoulder and said, "Can you explain what you do here?" And turns out his name's Dr. Dan Houlihan, and we started up a conversation, and from that created a project called DiveArc. Now, Dan had been doing lots of research. He is a former Navy officer, occupational therapist for over almost 20 years, and for a while was stationed over in Afghanistan, where you can see his front door, concussion restoration care clinic and combat stress clinic. His job was to evaluate soldiers who came in to determine if their injuries sustained that they could return to their duty, or if they needed to be medically evacuated. And as part of his experience, what he noted was that the most remarkable thing he observed was that during these clinical assessments, that despite having been blown up or involved in firefights, nearly all the troops wanted to go back out on duty alongside their teammates. And when he came back to the United States, he started his PhD and really was looking at this concept of reintegration. And so in all candor here, I am going to read a little bit. We have an upcoming chapter in a book on citizen science. The chapter is titled DiveArc and the Mission of Citizen Science. And most of this I'm reading is his research, and these are his slides, which he's generally graciously donated. When I called him up, I said, okay, here's the situation. I need to change my talk a little bit. So I'm grateful to him. And as I said, we have a chapter coming out, hopefully in the spring or summer, an upcoming volume of this. But for many of the 2.8 million combat veterans deployed, difficulties readjusting to civilian life commonly are attributed to the downstream effects of being traumatized by war. Approaching this problem, however, requires a view of deployment and homecoming widened beyond just combat exposure. What I mean by that is that, as he notes, 30% of deployed troops are trained to operate in combat environments, meaning the tip of the spear, while the other 70% are in supporting roles or logistical or medical roles, such as he was in. And further, it's estimated that no more than 10% of all deployed troops out of the 2.8 million were exposed to direct combat, and out of those, 2% sustained physical injuries. So viewing troubled homecomings as stemming primarily from combat trauma can limit a fuller understanding of the problem and compound veterans' difficulties by stigmatizing deployment experiences. And according to his research, most veterans report being proud of their service, recalling positive aspects of deployment, and feel deployment contributed to their personal growth. Further, most veterans report embracing the sense of purpose during deployment and characterize the time in military service as positive and contributing to the personal growth. But away from the military, veterans often report poorly relating to others in civilian life, feeling caught between worlds. So his study, as he was writing here, says we have to look beyond just that stigmatization that they're having difficulty transitioning because they're pathologizing, as he says, or feeling post-traumatic stress from the combat itself. As they reintegrate, many miss the structured lifestyle and have difficulty finding meaningful roles in civilian life. And so he was looking at this concept of reintegration as both a process and an outcome of transitioning to civilian life following the service, providing a sense of belonging and participating. And he started to look at activities that provided examples and opportunities for mission and purpose, and providing a sense of community. So for his PhD research, he interviewed Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. You can see this is his poster. Are you a scuba diver? Have you logged 5 or more dives? Intend to continue diving in the future? And he created the Tufts and the Dive Mine project based on this notion that activities such as scuba diving improves function of body and mind, such as vets with spinal cord. There's psychological aspects of scuba diving for people with physical disabilities, an occupational science perspective. And he interviewed 13 veterans who are divers, and he asked them what moved them, what was like coming home from deployment, and finally diving into their scuba diving experiences. And he states, divers describe submerging as a shifting into another world. Each expressed the importance of having a purpose underwater, varying from seeking to relax and simply appreciate the beauty and novelty. At other times, challenging one's capabilities and skills. One diver said, I've climbed mountains, whitewater raft, bungee jump, skydive, you name it, I did it. All that was taken away from me. What the hell am I supposed to do? So along came scuba, and I can do pretty much anything anyone else can. I haven't found a limit on what I can do with scuba yet. It's allowed me to find who I was a little bit more, that adventurous adrenaline junkie side. Now I'm getting into diving. I've met some new people who are not military, but are people who spend time on the water that dive. I'm starting to open up to that kind of friendship, people with same likes, because they can relate. Sharing a sense of purpose and accomplishment with other divers was consistently an element of participants' description of favorite dives. Examples of best dives including descending with a buddy to recover a weight pocket accidentally, going out with a group to hunt for lobsters, diving with fellow photographers to find an elusive creature, and after extensive technical preparation, being part of a team to reach a shipwreck few will ever see. Another said, now that I'm getting into diving, I've met some new people who are, I've just read that same quote. And so as I heard these stories, and as I started to talk with Dan, it was clear that archaeology had something to offer. And what I loved, as he's very expressive, he's a very deep thinker, and it was just really a synergy in talking about this notion of purpose, of transitional liminality, of moving from the normal world, crossing into the underwater world, and in doing so, opening up senses because of the hyper focus, knowing that in order to reach the surface again, they had a mission. They had to check their pressure, they had to check their air, and then you add on to that task loading and taking them to look at a shipwreck or hunting, and the camaraderie that comes with this. So we went back and forth and started to figure out ways we could work together and create a further study that became known as DiveArc. It was an offshoot of a partnership with originally Bridgewater State University, East Coast Divers, and the Nautical Archaeology Society, where we had a small group. You can see Vic right there in the foreground, worked with about 5 divers, originally all veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, and ran them through our Nautical Archaeology Society training so they could earn NAS credit, which is an avocational society I think most people probably are familiar with, and have our little mock shipwreck set up into the in the store of East Coast Divers right there. And then we practiced in the pool, laid down some rudimentary grids, had them practice buoyancy. They could also work on their diving skills as they were practicing their archaeology skills, and had a lot of success with this first trial run. We've wanted to do this more and more, except of course, COVID came along, logistics. Dan has moved to a different university, and so we're working to get back into the pool, but still not have had a facility open yet. But we took this to the next level after our first trial run in the pool. We also had other volunteers come down and meet us at Wacoit Bay at the Washburn Island in Wacoit Bay. The estuarine right there is a national and state preserve, about 300 square acres. That's Washburn Island right there. And this was known as the cradle of an invasion. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second, World War II. But we were able, with the veterans, to walk around the island. This is Jim Rasmussen right here, and he provided an excellent tour where he brought photographs and showed some training slides right where we were standing, so you can see some deployments. So as the United States was immersed in World War II, the military recognized the need for training amphibious forces. With the availability of resources at Camp Edwards and proximity of sandy beaches on the islands in Nantucket and Vineyard Sounds, Washburn Island offered an ideal location to prepare the troops for war. After leasing it from a local family, the local Washburn family, hence Washburn Island, a series of structures connecting the island to the mainland were constructed, including a new causeway and a bridge. And we can see some of those resources being brought over to the island in this picture. Much of the forest was cleared. The roads were built across the island, as were buildings, parade grounds, drill fields, and an obstacle course. Several new 900-foot-long docks protruded from Washburn into Wacoit Bay. And though it was shrouded in secrecy, one of the worst kept secrets for the locals, because they could observe many of the activities, and they gave the affectionate nickname of the Cape Cod Commandoes. For nearly 2 years, launching from Washburn, these Cape Cod Commandoes developed skills and tactics for amphibious landing and would run full-scale mock invasions back and forth between Washburn Island and Martha's Vineyard. These exercises proved invaluable on the beaches of the battlefields throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. And then after the war, this is where it is really, the story continues. Many of the soldiers returned back to Washburn Island and transformed it into a place of restoration and reintegration. While no hospitals were built here, soldiers and veterans were brought back and could camp and talk with other veterans and heal and fish and recreate. And it became a safe place and a haven. And while on the sound side was a location, a space and place training for war, on the bay side was a safe space and place for healing. And so, much like a coin, Washburn Island is a symbolic landmark that encapsulates the World War II history in a special area and commemoration. And yet, not many people know this, or the role that Washburn Island played in training the first amphibious forces during World War II. So, through a series of serendipitous events in 2021, a project called Preserving the Cradle of Invasion started through the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. MAS received a grant from the State Historic Records Advisory Board, or SHRAB, in order to start preserving the oral histories of living veterans who trained or served around Washburn Island. And to make this happen, we were indebted to volunteers such as Neil Good in the down near Falmouth for providing us contacts of 4 veterans, 2 nurses and 2 cadets who trained on the island. The kid of the group is 99 years old, and our the ages range from 99 to 103. So you can see that there was a time element. Preserving their oral histories was time sensitive, and so our first objective was simply to document the irreplaceable oral histories of these 4 wonderful people. And we arranged to, for Dan, because of his experience and his veteran status, his experience with occupational therapy, as well as his service, was the lead interviewer. I was the PI. Over the spring and early summer, we developed semi-structured questions that we were to ask them. We worked with their families to find the best way to interview them, whether that was through Zoom, face-to-face, or a phone call. We were able to interview 3 of the 4 participants, with the 4th, her daughter, just simply did not feel that she was able to answer her questions, and we respectfully acknowledged that and wished her well. And then if there was anything down the road that they were able to offer, we surely would be interested in this. For the other 3, we were able to produce over an hour, over 60 minutes of interview time with each of them, with some great quotes. I'm not going to say the names, and as we haven't released them, but for participant 1, he was a cadet from West Point, and when he went to Washburn Island, which he didn't know anything about, he learned different types of landing craft and all kinds of things that I had never been familiar with in my entire life, such as bridge building and cargo handling, how to move supplies and bundle them. You got to do them right, because if you put a bolt in wrong, it'll snap and the whole bridge will go down. Painful experience. He talked about what the mock invasion of Martha's Vineyard would be like. He was on the shore regiment and saw one of the landing crafts having problem and was beginning to drift onto the rocks. The crew had gotten out into the water and were doing their very best to keep that boat from smashing on the rocks, doing exactly what their job was, as he said. And I remember going out into the water and lending my 170 pounds of, he is a crack up, I'm laughing. Let me say this, start over. And lending my 170 pounds of well-conditioned muscle, because we were in good shape in those days, and trying to save the boat from severe damage. And while I was doing that, a major came up on the shore, keeping his boots very dry, and yelled at me to get the hell out of the water. So I came over to him and said, "Sir, what do you want?" And he said, "You're not supposed to be in there like an enlisted man doing all that dirty work. Let them do it." I said I was trying to save the boat. And he said, "I don't give a goddamn what you're doing. You don't mingle with enlisted men and do their work." So I continued on with what I was doing. And I noticed another officer sitting over on the edge of the beach. He said, "Young man, come over here." So I went over there, and it was a 2-star general. And I said, "Boy, you're in it for now." And I said, "Boy," to himself, "you are in it for now." And he said, "Yeah." And he recognized me as a cadet, I guess because we were wearing fatigues or something. And he said, pay no attention to that major. He's absolutely wrong. You were absolutely right." And it turned out he was the commanding general. One of the ladies that we interviewed was a nurse, and she talks about going into training. So I didn't know that at the time, but then when they assigned us, we went through basic training. So gas chamber and crawling across, infiltration, of course, when you crawled on your hands and knees because they were shooting at you. I think it was live. It was on the men I know. They told us it was too. So to keep down, because otherwise you'd get shot. So we went through that, and then learning how to put tents up, shelter. Most of them carried half the tents on our packs so that we could join with somebody else if they had another half. When we get together, we had a class. What was the name of it? I'm trying to think of it. Oh, Kill or Be Killed. How to push eyes out if you had to. And so these stories, as we focused on, were not about World War II overall, because all of these veterans went on and did amazing things in the theaters. But we focused on Washburn Island. And as we talked to them and we did research, we realized the story is much bigger, that we had letters in Spanish of writing home. There were women serving in different capacities in the island. We had an African-American troop that was segregated from the white soldiers, and to such a degree that the officers of the African-American unit couldn't eat in the officers' tent with the other ones because they were in charge of the African-American unit. And we have forgotten voices and stories of Washburn Island, not only for the training, but also recreational, boxing matches. General Patton could be there. There's this wealth of information that occurred in this very small area for the Cape Cod Commandos. And we are just beginning. This project, Preserving the Cradle of Invasion, is ongoing. We received the funding last year and really just were doing everything in our power and focus to make sure we got the oral interviews of these wonderful people as quickly as we could, knowing that time was limited. And now, as we move forward, we're hoping to do a deep dive into the historical ephemera and primary sources over the next year. The idea would be to do an exhibit or reconstruct in various platforms, even possibly doing a heritage trail on Washburn down the road with support from the Estuarine and the Bay Area. But that's, as I like to say on this project, we really put the cart before the horse on this one, because we wanted to make sure that we got these wonderful oral histories, and those are just a sample of some of the testimonials. So we're very excited about where this is going. And we are, as I said, with Massachusetts Archaeology Society. You can ask Vic about more information if you want to get involved or interested in this. Right now, we are looking at the area on the Cape, out of Falmouth and up at Edwards Air Force Base. And we're interested in legacy and lineage, other stories of descendants and agencies. So we are looking at moving broader than what we were able to do in 2021 with COVID, hopefully slowly receding in the background, but I don't want to jinx anything. So these two projects have been developing over the last 2 to 3 years or last year, and really have brought me wonderful experiences. And in this, I was able to present at Society for Historical Archaeology, at least about the work with dive art, and was approached by people who were in contact with Project Recover. Project Recover is a nonprofit that was established in the early 90s as called the Bed Prop Initiative. And the gentleman who founded it is right here, Pat Scannon, is really a labor of love and worked a lot in the Pacific, specifically in Palau, walking around the shore, talking to the indigenous people, locals, and established this nonprofit, as I said, that eventually became Project Recover in 2016, 2018, with explicit mission to bring all missing service people home. And I'll talk about that here. And they asked me, they're expanding their operations. Right now they have one archaeologist. It's called a scientific research expert in government speak. It's just the SRE, and they want to do more of these. So they brought me over to Palau in August of last summer to observe and to see what they do and to get firsthand experience of what types of projects that could be done. This was a phase 3 excavation. And so what I'm showing you right here is what I can for a moment, and then we'll switch over to other government approved photographs. We see Palau as an island nation, beautiful, only 20,000 people with several hundred islands that string just north of Indonesia and Australia. Some of the best diving in the world with its coral reefs and wildlife, and is famous for its World War II aircraft that litter the island and the waters, such as the TBM Avenger. And in 1944, there was a battle called the Battle of Pelelu, which was a small island in the south of Palau that had an airport. And from 15th of September to the 27th of November, Allied forces, specifically Americans, took or fought for possession of this island. They were able to take the airport very quickly, but the rest of the island took 2 months and became known, unfortunately, as Operation Stalemate due to the severe losses and casualties that the various regiments and battalions suffered as they were moving north. It was not just called Stalemate, but it also made the U.S. Navy rethink their strategy, and they actually skipped the island altogether after the 2 months of battle. And so it has a bit of a bittersweet tone and history and legacy with this. Our mission was to look at TBM Avenger, which is a 3-person aircraft with a pilot, a gunner in the back, and then in the middle, a radio man who also functioned as the bombardier and ventral or underneath the aircraft gunner. And they would take off, and basically they would have a torpedo that they could drop down and weaponize. This aircraft went down in Palau, and our mission was to excavate the aircraft and determine if there was, as the government says, osseous remains, or if there were any remains there. And that is all I can say to that, which is where I was calling Vic from. So this is a model of the TBM Avenger. So in talking with Department of Defense and DPA, they have approved photographs. These are not from my project, but they will give a sense of what it was like as far as day-to-day activities. What we did every day was, after waking up, come out to a barge similar to this one. This was a small little industrial site with a crane. As you see here, there were dive stations and safety stations, comm stations, and an archaeological station, as well as cleaning artifacts. So again, these are all been approved, and from the source, these are not people in our project whatsoever, but every day we would have a dive briefing, and we were using surface air, so it was hard hat diving. The diving was supplied by a group of veterans themselves, Navy divers called Legion Underwater Services, and it was 2 former Navy divers who brought it in group in their colleagues as well as comrades and friends back to this project, all giving their time to help. And what they would do, they enter the water, and what was interesting is when they came back up, this the site was over 100 feet, and they would spend about over an hour at depth. And when they came up, they did decompression diving, which meant normally when you're at that depth, it'd be a few hours, and that time it'd be a few hours of decompression. You'd sit in the water for maybe an hour or two. Instead, they brought them up within 20 minutes, and they brought them to the deck. And this was a very intense moment. Everybody stayed out of the way because they had 5 minutes to get them into a recompression chamber, close the chamber, and then bring them down to depth, as I say, so that they wouldn't suffer the bends or any decompression illness or sickness. And it was pretty intense. They had to get out of all their gear, all the hard hat, all the hoses, move through. They had to wash down. You had to get all the information that they saw at the bottom, and then get in there where they would sit for basically 75 minutes. So an hour down, 75 minutes in the chamber. And this allowed a quicker rotation. You would have more people able to go down and work longer than you would be able to on scuba. For example, I dove the site a couple times and was only able to stay down with the tank for 15 minutes before having to return to the surface in order to avoid decompression sickness. So it was very intense and very much a team event. And let's see, I have another video, and I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to see if I can, people hopped off. See if this runs a little faster. So the original presentation, I actually have some video showing the methodology and how what it was like. This is from Defense Visual Low System. Oh, this might not work, so we'll just give it a shot. But this is a gentleman dredging. Let's see if we can get to it. Oh. So we have sound, so to give a little ambiance. Really, this is what you'd hear. The divers were human ROVs, and they would do the work. They would have cameras on their shoulders or on their helmets, and they would start dredging, and we would discuss and communicate with them. One of the big challenges, of course, is establishing the proper lines of communication. It's the different languages of Navy divers and archaeologists coming together, being able to describe what you're seeing in terms that both can understand and accomplishing the mission. Well, all right. And again, these are DoD approved, so we don't see the full context, but our divers would go down and excavate more often. As soon as they turned on the dredge, this is what you would see or would be like on the screen. It would go to zero visibility pretty fast. We would be on the surface watching them, looking at them, talking, but really just try to stay out of their way. The DPAA, Defense POWMI Accounting Agency, has a very different set of standards for their archaeology. It's more of a forensics project. They have a goal of recovering human remains, and you can see their grid units are much larger than what we would consider standard by any stretch on terrestrial or even underwater. They ran 4 meter by 4 meter units, and generally their levels were down to 20 to 30 centimeters. And so it was in service of that recovery, and it's very difficult actually as an archaeologist to wrap your head around some of that as we're pulling up material. Their clear directive is that if it's probative, meaning if it's forensically probative, will it lead you to one of the servicemen? Or is it archaeologically probative, meaning it'll tell you about the site, but it's not forensically, it doesn't give you a clue on where to go. And then non-probative, which is the aircraft. So a lot of it is salvage, and a lot of it is determining whether or not this will be used to help you find the human remains. And that was one of the things I had to learn and talk about and discuss with the lead archaeologist. And from my understanding, that is a very common discussion that's had as archaeologists get into the DPA methodology. I'm not even gonna, there's a video on this. I'm not even gonna try to show the video with the last two ones, but these would be the filter baskets. The dredge spoil would be, the dredge hose would go in here and pump this down, and then there'd be very heavy. So crane would be attached and lifted, again, not showing the actual baskets for sensitivity reasons. But this is the crane operator, and basically would lower it down, bring up the baskets, and you would start to clean them out, rinse it down, lift any of the large boulders and rocks out. The lead archaeologist had to examine every single piece in case any human remains was attached to any of the coral or rocks. We would take them over to cleaning stations, wet stations primarily, where we'd rinse off the mud and sediment and then go through that. If it wasn't forensically probative, they were put in one pile for usually photographic documentation, but not for conservation or collection. if there was any indication that it could be osseous material, they were put into a very special area and documented much more thoroughly with tags and both photographic as well as archiving record keeping. I did include this one because this is a Defense Department's approved picture. This is actually one of our Army volunteers on their days off. They would come and help us screen. And this is Pelelu. This is the site. This is Project Recover. And this is actually where we were in this last summer. And I can show this freely. This is John Marsack. He was the leader, the CEO of the diving operations, underwater Legion services, and also approved. So it's good to get him in here. And then, well, they didn't approve this, but this is me. So I decided sometimes they let the archaeologists help out, but with very basic tasks. I got to hold the umbilical cord, which was important, and certainly made me feel useful, as a lot of times you're just supervising up on the surface. And as an observer, most of my time was watching to see how operations went, and even got to hop in to go down and check for quality control. So those are my fun parts of the day, usually at the end. All of this, though, has a very serious purpose, and that's to provide closure, to bring all soldiers and veterans home, and to provide them a proper burial, to bring their family members a sense of closure and relief, and even answers where possible. So overall, there's quite a bit of work to do, and I'm just going to read this, but the Defense POWMI Accounting Agency's mission is to provide the fullest possible accounting for our missing personnel from past conflicts to their families and the nation. As this map shows, at present, more than 81,600 Americans remain missing from World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and the Gulf Wars, along with other conflicts. Out of the more than 81,600 missing, 75% of the losses are located in the Indo-Pacific, and over 41,000 of the missing are presumed lost at sea. So, keeping America's promise and the role of maritime archaeology has the role of maritime archaeology in keeping America's promise is significant, and currently looking at doing further projects to go out, locate, search for, locate, and then ultimately do phase 3 excavations to bring home all possible remains and people back to their homes. And that is the fullest account that we can do. So that brings me to the end, and I'll end with this quote from a famous poem from For the Fallen. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really good. So if people have any questions for Calvin, you guys can put them in the chat and I'll relay them to him. Oh, Marty loved your presentation, as
Thanks,
always,
Marty.
and everything.
Nice.
He's such a nice cheerleader. I love Marty, and everything. My question for you, while we wait for other questions to come in, is, what was the sort of most surprising thing that sort of came out of this project that you didn't sort of foresee?
I guess, well, from what we didn't pay attention to as an archaeologist. So you have all the aircraft coming up, and you want to look at, want to figure it out, and the lead archaeologist was like, no, over there, that pile. It's ACW Aircraft Wreckage is a probe, and you get actually, we found the radio. We found artifacts that were very interesting. And from a heritage and archaeological point of view, and just my own interests. You just wanted to like have time with it, and that wasn't it. It's fast paced, and it's very clear. And when you go there, what is the mission? And it is really human remains recovery. And anything outside of that is not relevant to the mission. So the question is it full archaeology, or is it an archaeology in service of a purpose? I would not say it's full archaeology, but I think they would acknowledge that as well. And so just having that moment, but also there are moments in there where it goes beyond, it transcends the archaeology. I will say, what I can say is there were certain moments where you realize why it mattered greatly. And so in that sense, we always have that connection to the past, why we get into archaeology. And I think that larger mission is transcendent. So I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I don't think it would be a big deal at MAS, but then again, I thought I could get approved in a week, and that was clearly not going to happen. So
It's all good. We understand. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the thing, with archaeology. We're not the archaeologists of like the 1800s. We're like, ooh, things, right? It's about the people, no matter how you're sort of doing it, right?
Yeah. And where I was this summer, we knew that there was remains that had been confirmed. So we were looking for that. A lot of course, when you're at a phase 2, you don't know. You're not sure if there's going to be human remains. So with Woods Hole, we're looking at ways that we can use technology to try to speed that process up. So it's really kind of an exciting time with this group.
Very cool. I have another question, sort of tangential to that. In terms of the human remains, what will they do to identify them so they can return them to their families? How does that work?
So the one thing we were pounded into our head is never say that there's been a recovery. You've always found osseous material. So you make sure in case it gets, there's been sites, terrestrial sites, particularly where it was humans' remains were found and it turned out to be the remains of pig bones, right? Because of eating and discard. And so they look like ribs. But to answer that question is you treat all of them as if they were. And there's a chain of custody, and then somebody from the government will meet you to take claim of that. And there's the forensic labs in one in Nebraska, and I think another one in Arizona. And it's the laboratory work where really the DNA, the forensics come to play. So you try not to make any kind of hypothesis or anything that gets anybody excited. Because if a family member gets hold of that and you turn out to be wrong, like you say you've ID'd a person, that result will be worse than taking a little extra time to get it right.
But they will work on identifying.
That is their main goal. So the reason, anything that even the smallest amount of osseous material or bone is treated extra carefully, because that all gets sent back for the DNA analysis.
Okay, very cool. It's good, bring everyone home, right? Naomi wants to know, she says, such a powerful and interesting topic. Is there any scope to do outreach with schools to share your project and findings?
There absolutely is, not necessarily with me on this one. I'm learning partly because of just even this process of, I realize, the best speakers for this will be the members of Project Recover. That being said, the way I learn about how to get this message out is, asking. So if there is interest with schools and things like that, I reach out from here on out. I won't say I can do it, but I'll say I sure as heck would love to find out. And if there was interest in that, to talking to school groups, let me know, and we can start that process. So I think absolutely with the Department of Defense, one of the missions for DPA is PR or public outreach, like any agency would.
Very cool. I do have to say, I'm probably already going to send your name and all this stuff to my friend who works for the Veterans Curation Program down south. So yeah. So Dave has he thinks he recently saw a similar program for vets to dive on 60 Minutes, maybe another PBS show. Do you know of any other projects similar to this also for vets in that
Yeah,
vein,
there's
or is this more like the only one or whatever?
no, not at all. There's quite a bit out there. There's the National Park Service has a group called Blue Wave. Even in Massachusetts, there's another group. Vic, maybe you can help me out. I forget the name of divers with veterans. There's tactical.
Blue Wave. Is that Blue Wave?
But that was with the Park Service. I forget. Well, with archaeology, there's a group called Tactical Reintegration. No, that's ours. Task Force Dagger, who works with East Carolina University, and they've been doing a lot of work in Saipan. So avocational work with veterans seems you can find several groups, not to mention just diving groups around the United States. From disabilities to mental health. And I think one thing, if Dan was here, he'd be like, Calvin, don't forget this, and which I did. But one of the things we're really looking at is that this isn't just for divers. It's really a mental health issue or just archaeologists. It's really the sense of purpose and community, bringing people together. And we're taking, people that suffer from all different types of post-traumatic stress. And this idea of mission and purpose, I heard it all the time in Palau. When the Navy guys came back, they're like, man, I was so bored. It's so great to be doing what I know how to do. And I think, that aspect of a purpose-driven life and reintegration into the civilian world, you lose that camaraderie. So I'll let Dan do the theory of that, because he'll talk 20-30 minutes on that. What we're really looking at is not a archaeology issue or a diver issue. It's more of a mental health issue.
Very good. And we have a comment also from Dave just saying, thank you for your efforts to bring closure for families that otherwise did not have that. So working towards it, no matter what the results are, right? Well, those were the questions that we had for you tonight, Calvin. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for everybody for coming out. And
Thank you very much, Calvin.
yeah, no problem, Vic. I'll see you soon.
Yes. Everyone have a wonderful night. Hopefully we will see you next month. Again, it is sort of digital archaeology, but you don't need to know anything about it to join us and everything. So it'll be really fun and exciting. So have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.